Okay. Council, administration, we are called back to order at 5:31. Any further discussion on the, action item 4.4? Seeing none, we will move on to item 4.5, residential tax incentives administration.
Thank you, Chair. So I'm bringing this report forward. This one does talk about incentives for residential development, but different than what we were talking about with the infill land strategy. That's specific to the land that we were selling. This bylaw would be something that is put in place for all residential development, whether that be private transactions or developments. But it would apply to everybody equally as long as they fulfill the conditions that council wants to set. And so we haven't put a draft bylaw in front of you yet because this bylaw can look any which way. And really this is about council deciding what your priorities for and what should council or, what should we as a municipality subsidize to encourage what type of development. And we have a lot of decisions that could be made or different types. So this is, as of right now, I'm not familiar with any municipalities who have this bylaw just because the ability to offer residential tax incentives like this came in place with Bill 20 on October 31st. There have been communities who have done some kind of residential tax incentives, and what comes to mind is some have done like a tax-free for 3. The difference here is you can't actually guarantee, or previous to this, to Bill 20, you couldn't actually guarantee to provide 3 years of tax incentives because every year council would have to decide if they wanted to waive taxes retroactively in that year. This one operates like our non-residential tax incentives where it's not retroactive. Council doesn't need to make a decision on these individual properties on a yearly basis. Once they've signed up and been approved, regardless of what we do with the bylaw, they are entitled to the full term of what we've set through the bylaw. So really my plan was just to take council through, some of the bones or the really important questions of the bylaw to get your direction. And then once we have that direction, I can go back, draft a bylaw and bring it back. So first, my first question is committee interested in looking at tax exemptions or deferrals?
Sorry, I had Councilor Hawes in first, myself and Councilor Taylor.
Yeah, to that question, for personally, I would only be interested in tax exemptions, would be my thought. I'm not a big fan of deferral, I think, because eventually you gotta pay it anyway, right? So I think that there's more possibilities of people opting to with an exemption versus a deferral. That's my thoughts, so.
I'm actually gonna withdraw because I had something else. Councilor Taylor?
I don't know if this helps. I don't see the business exemption thing that we did that effective. There's like 2, maybe 3 businesses that used it. Would it have actually brought that extra business in if we had used it for that? If you leave on the other picture, or would they have done it anyways? They probably would have done it anyway. So it hasn't brought an explosion of new business into us. What I see that maybe the developers want is some upfront help on the costs. Be it with they need some upfront development costs. I don't know exactly the details, but it could be significant. It could be a major roadway that goes into the development, or it could be some 50-50 on sewer or water or something like that. That's what I think would make the difference with my limited knowledge of development. Whether that's an exemption or whatever, the deferral probably is the exemption. We help pay something, but we could always have done that. By law, Bill 20 didn't change. We could have always have done that. The Bill 20 doesn't change any of that, does it?
For tax exemptions,
For helping with some of the upfront development into to an area. With that Bill 20 doesn't affect that at all.
No.
So we could have done that, and that's what I think would make the biggest difference is helping them with those upfront costs to get them started. And staying out of their way later on, putting as few conditions as possible in their development. You know, you put tight, we're gonna build it this, you have to build it this quickly. Your timeline, we're gonna buy it back. It can only be zoned specifically for this, not giving them broad zoning. Those are things that are gonna discourage development. So we can do some things to help, but if we do these things that discourage development, then it sort of cancels it all out, and we haven't done anything effective. We've gotta be careful of the whole picture.
I have, myself, Councillor Hosland, Councillor Race, then the mayor. For myself, in speaking to this now, while I disagree respectfully with Councillor Taylor's assessment that the exemptions really haven't been that effective, I think they have been effective. You know, we do have a major employer that's in town and they're not here to speak whether or not they came because of those programs or not. Where I do absolutely agree with Councillor Taylor, at least I think this is what he's saying, is I think having a whole suite of tools at our disposal in any potential bylaw is probably better than hitching our wagons solely to tax exemptions. While I agree tax exemptions could be good, deferral on offsite levies as an example, I think that plays in precisely to what Councillor Taylor is saying. So keeping those sorts of things as potential options as incentives. If we look at the word incentives, it's potentially broad reaching and I would be supportive of that. Councillor Hawes, Race, the mayor, then Councillor Ostasher.
So I guess where I'm going from is the original motion. We never discussed any of that. The specific is on tax incentives for residential development. We've completed 2 of them. This was the 3rd one in that. But my understanding, I guess where I'm at, is tax exemption is more for the person who's gonna be paying the taxes. It's not up for the person that's developing it. It's the people that are paying the taxes, which right now we don't see a lot of new builds because people are not building new homes. So this is an opportunity for, if my family is living in a home and wants to build a new home, those costs are gonna be part of building the home, but then it's the tax exemption is on me. So that's the incentive. We want people to start building. It's the same thing with apartments and things like that. The developer, it's not about the developer, it's the person who's gonna be paying the taxes on that. And to me, that is a great incentive, you know, cause I'm looking at this is then developers build a home and then it's more likely to sell that home because there's a tax exemption for whether it's 3 years or 5 years or whatever. So that's where I'm coming from. And I like I said, like I'm not in favor of deferrals whatsoever, but my interest is in the exemption part of it. So, but that's my thought. To me, that's going off in a direction that we didn't make direction on to do. So right now it's on, do we want tax incentives? Do we want deferrals? So, thank you.
Councillor Race?
Thank you, sir. So I would be in favor of the tax exemptions. Today I did talk to 3 developer or builder people and they're very interested to see where this goes. So if a developer came in and built a whole bunch of tiny homes, he would get the exemption, the tax break. Or if they did a mobile home park.
Through the chair, who is eligible? The exemptions is your decision. It could be all residential, doesn't matter what type, or it could be very targeted to specific types of residential development that council wants to incentivize. And that's up to you. That's kind of the question number 2. But yes, generally, you know, if we said all residential developments and somebody came in and put in a mobile home park and they meet the criteria, then yes, they would get the tax exceptions.
The developer would get the tax break? Is that what you're saying?
Well, for taxes, and it depends on how we structure it, when they apply, but generally they make the application, you know, when they're about to build. And then, you know, year one while they're building year two, which may still be in the hands of the developer. You may be getting the tax exemptions, and then maybe, for example, 3, 4, 5 is with a homeowner.
Yeah.
It depends on how quickly it's done and or if it's only 1 year. The timeline that we allow for them to apply, it'll all make a difference,
Yeah.
but the developer could see benefit in not paying the tax, but the tax won't be quite as much when it's under development, right? Because it's not a completed home, it's
Yeah.
not assessed as a finished product.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, Councilor Stashik, myself, Councilor Haas.
Thank you, through the chair to administration, to answer the question on exempted or deferred, I'm of the exempted opinion. I'm not interested in all residential developments. I think we should be incentivizing development that we want to see in the community. I think from my perspective, that's multifamily residential apartments and purpose-built long-term rentals. That's what I'm most interested in subsidizing. To Councillor Taylor's point on our non-residential tax incentive bylaw, we did bring in a large player. That bylaw, I think, did have a effect on Monty's decision ultimately, and I think that we could utilize a residential tax incentive bylaw to try and bring in potentially a larger residential development, maybe something that's purpose-built rental that helps build out our property ladder. The other side of things that I could see being a good advocate or a good place to go and incentivize would be the addition of legal secondary suites in existing residences. I've seen this in other communities where you can tax exempt potentially the difference in assessment from putting in a legal suite from before to after, much like we do with our non-residential tax incentive, but that's a good way to increase density within our existing communities in a way that's, again, gets them inspected and we know that they're being built correctly into code and everybody's safe in our community. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councilor Stashik.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Rather than having a big all-encompassing conversation about all the different components, I'm just gonna put a direction request forward to seek consensus of committee to proceed with tax exemptions for residential development. If I could speak to it,
Please.
it's just high-level tax exemption. Are we in favor or not? Yes or no? And then we can have conversation after that about what types of residential development we would want to see it applied to, whether it's developer, builder, or final owner. All those other conversations can come subsequent to this decision.
Councilor Stashik, I'll just ask a question clarifying. Is your intention to continue that conversation if this is successful at this meeting? Then,
Oh, yeah.
okay,
Yeah, it's just to get past question 1.
okay, sounds good.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. There is a consensus request on the table. I will withdraw myself from queue. Councilor Hawes, you're in queue.
Yeah, I'll stay because that was my intent, was to do the same. So I'm in favor of this. If this gets the ball rolling, and then, yeah, we can have a more fulsome conversation as to what we want to see. But I think it's a good place to, where is council at with this particular tax exemption with residential development. So I'm in favor of it. Thank you.
Sounds good. Thank you very much. Council, we'll let that, while that's getting up on the board, any other discussion on the consensus request on the floor? Councilor Stashik, I just want to make sure that that reflects your consensus request. That committee seek consensus to proceed with tax exemption.
Exemptions on residential development.
Thank you very much.
Good. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilor Taylor.
Will that cover offset levies?
Through the chair, members of council, no, this bylaw is specific to the exemptions of taxes.
So property taxes,
That's correct.
that's it.
Council, any further discussion on the consensus request on the floor? Seeing none, then we'll call the question that committee seek consensus to proceed with tax exemptions on residential development. You can please vote now. Councilor Taylor is voting in favor. Councilor Stashik in favor?
Yeah.
Okay. So that is carried with, council unanimously in favor.
They come right away.
Okay, council, the floor is open. Councilor Haas.
I guess I just, and it's not particularly what types of residential quite yet, but I do agree. So for me, it would be single, or multifamily, apartments. But just the wording, I guess. Mobile homes are usually a thing of the past. Is that, we're now modulars? Is that a more accurate term for mobile homes? Cause they're a lot different than what mobile homes typically would be seen as, right?
Through the chair to members of council, I'll have to refine these definitions going through the bylaw to make sure that it's, because, you know, through our land use bylaw, we're very specific on our definitions, but you know, at the time of writing the report, I put mobile homes, but because a modular unit can be, you know, I think there's a wide range of something very small, or it could be, you know, a very large house that nobody would think is modular, but modular in my mind, at least when writing the report, is it's more of a construction method than a specific residential type. So, you know, like I said, I'll refine the definitions when I go through it, but my intent was, you know, mobile homes or trailers or.
Right. Well, because the reason I asked that question is that was a very topic over in munis, you know, when it comes to housing, that the trend seems to be more that modular style, because it can range from a $200,000 home to $600,000, $800,000, right? But they're still considered modular, which are still considered somewhat mobile, so because they're built off-site, brought to the site, that type of thing. So that's fine, you know, that just was curious on, and so we can see those in the definition. Okay, thank you.
I have myself in queue next. To answer the question number 2, administration, from my perspective, I could live both ways with either A, identifying that we would like to see all residential development increase, because the one thing that we haven't seen is a lot of build outs. That would be my first sort of thought. However, as a follow-up thought, you know, if it was the will of council, I could also be very happy with all of the identified areas except, and I don't see it listed in here, but I think it's implied, without the inclusion of executive level homes. That's not an area that I have a lot of people talking to me about. I have a lot of people talking about entry level homes, single family residential and rental units for those people who, you know, they're struggling with fixed incomes or lower incomes. That's just for myself, and I'd be happy either way. Councillor Ostashik.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I had a question regarding the tiny homes one. I might be wrong, but my understanding, tiny homes developments aren't actually permitted in our land use bylaw, right? They have to be part of a existing development, like, I forget what the exact terminology is.
Please.
Through the chair, so, tiny homes are permitted in certain residential zonings when they're a secondary suite. But based on how we've actually developed the definition, if somebody were to come with us and say, we would like this land to do a little tiny home village and put in, you know, let's say 20 tiny homes, you know, the definition would really just require, a DC zoning, so we can allow for it through our, through how we structured it. We didn't proactively say, you know, these types of lands are conducive for it. It's based on a, you know, the particular proposal at the time. So, yeah.
Councillor Ostashik, follow up.
Sort of follow up, yeah, that helps inform my decision about what I would support, what I wouldn't support. I'd like to see consensus of committee to include entry-level housing. And actually specify $400,000. Or less.
Thank you very
If I
much.
could speak to it.
Yeah, please.
I think that's one of the highest demand things. There are new, quite expensive single-family detached homes for sale in the community right now. And in speaking to some of the real estate agents that I work with, they've indicated that's not really what they're getting the bulk of their calls about. The bulk of their calls that they're getting, or people are looking for is entry-level housing. And that's what's short in supply in Hinton at this time. So if we could do something to incentivize that, that would help. By no means the end of the list. I'm just throwing it out there to see if committee wants to put that on the list of things to focus on. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Rostash. Councillor Hawes, do you want to stay in queue or do you
I
want?
want to stay in queue and just briefly, I'm in favor, so, perfect.
Awesome. I'll put myself in queue, and I just want to mention from a procedural standpoint, thanks Councillor Stajik, the smart way to go through the list, and I am in favor. Councillor Taylor,
Are you talking about standalone entry-level housing?
direct question?
Yeah, to me, it doesn't really matter. If it's a single family home that can be obtained for less than $400,000, it doesn't really matter if it's a detached single family home, whether it's duplex, fourplex, condo. It doesn't matter to me, as long as a family can move in and live there for less than $400,000, that's all I'm really looking for.
That's good. But I think you can build them.
The chair is gonna seek, because that would be my understanding as well. Administration, just for clarification, would that be your understanding that, item F actually could cover a number of those other items as well?
Yeah, through the chair, and we specifically identify units under 400,000, because, you know, if, let's say, bought a fourplex, for example, for 5, but on a per unit basis, that somebody's purchase, you know, but if, as long as the unit is under that $400,000 mark, it'd be eligible, and again, we'll have to build out some, you know, the specified criteria of what exactly that means, but that's my understanding, my intent.
Thank you very much. Council, any discussion, Councillor Taylor?
How is that then different than multifamily? With the same. Right?
What, admin?
Yeah, through the chair to members count, multifamily it can be as well. So this is specifying by price point, but we can also specify by type as well. So we can say multifamily residential, because there are, you know, quite a few multifamily residential units that are above $400,000 in the community. So, you know, if we were to include multifamily residential, then all would be included. But if we didn't, then it would only be those multifamily residential units under the 400,000 mark.
Good, Councillor Taylor?
Mhm.
Okay, council, any further discussion on the admin?
Sorry, Chair, if I could, just for the consensus, that committee see consensus to include entry-level housing, I would just say 4 units under 400,000.
Well, the word for to come before units?
Just not, for example,
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
I see.
and then
4 units under 400.
I could probably get rid of the brackets as well.
Councillor Stashik? Okay, comfortable, excellent. Council, any further discussion on that while it's being, just clarified there? Councillor Taylor?
Stupid question. Do people actually make houses, units under 400,000? I've seen units made that look like lower income, but they're over 400.
Councillor Stashik?
For example, there are new condo units for sale. I'm gonna say where, but they are brand new builds for less than $400,000.
And
Yeah, currently.
Council? Any further discussion on the consensus request on the floor? Seeing none, then we will call the question that committee seek consensus to include entry-level housing for units under 400,000. Council, if you can please vote now. Councillor Taylor in the affirmative. And that is carried unanimously. Thank you very much. Councillor Hawes.
Thank you. I just want to confirm something before I make a consensus. Under the current non-residential, apartments don't fit in under that, I'm assuming, because I know it's residential is where apartments would go, but ultimately, I mean, apartments are typically somewhat like commercial, because I mean, if I'm gonna build an apartment, I'm bringing in income from it, but apartments do not fall under the current non-residential, correct?
Through the chair to Councillor Hall, no, non-residential, in the way that it's structured. So if it's a residential use, so, apartments would be, covered under the residential portion and.
Okay.
Yeah, and and can't be covered under the non-residential.
So I would like to see consensus to include, apartment builds, under this bylaw.
Thank you, Counselor. Do you want to speak to that at all?
Yeah, I've talked a lot about, the lack of apartments in our community. They're pretty much saturated with what we have, and, having an incentive to build an apartment structure, I think would be beneficial for our community. There are some that, are unable necessarily to buy houses at some point, so it makes sense to have apartments. It may also increase the amount or our seniors to stay in our communities as well, to downsize to apartments, so thank you.
Thank you, Counselor. I have myself and Counselor Ostashik. Administration. I'm fully in support of this. I think apartments are actually they've been a key missing area of development for a long time. However, I think that the town may have a role, well, I think the town does have a role to play from a vision standpoint in the communication and outreach to development. This has actually been something Counselor Taylor has talked to me before about, as a community, how aggressive are we in going out and trying to work with developers from even outside the community and type them come in. I would like to see us tackle that question. I understand it's not directly part of this consensus. Where do you see that though, in this discussion? At what point do we bring that up, and at what point do we ask the town, what are we doing about that?
Yeah, through the chair to members of council, I would say right now, we deal with the developers that we know and who approach us. But in terms of, like a proactive economic development standpoint, where we're going out with an incentive package, and we're going to, meeting with the developers, as of right now, we don't do that. But as of right now, we don't have, we've looked at incentives in a multitude of different ways, but never from but I don't think from a proactive standpoint where we can say, hey, we offered it here, but we could offer it elsewhere, right? So that's why policy is so important when it comes to non-residential tax incentives, or developing an incentive package that's open and something that we can actually take and say, this applies in all of these cases, and here are the criteria for you to meet it. Because as of right now, we've looked at individual cases where it made sense and we've made a judgment call, but, developing an incentive package that's, for our land or for all private land, like we're talking about here, that's, proactively and from a policy standpoint allows us to do that. So as of right now, we haven't, but we don't have a lot to sell.
Counselor Stanton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I'm gonna be fully in support of this. I think apartments are probably one of the things that are most important and that I would most support. Having a tax exemption or even some additional incentives to get some apartment buildings built in town. Talking to people who want to come here, want to stay here, the biggest portion of people who aren't able to are people who are seeking to rent an apartment. There just aren't apartments available in town, and there certainly aren't affordable apartments available in town, so it's prohibitive for some of our young adults to be able to stay in the community, and for many of the working people to be able to come to our community, to have an affordable place for them to live. And I think it's worth noting that it's been probably, well, definitely over 40 years since the last new apartment construction happened in Hinton, so I think we're more than due to get some new apartment buildings put up here. Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor. Counselor Taylor.
Excuse my ignorance, but incentive for who? How do these incentives, the property tax exemptions, how are they gonna work for who? Get the developer, get them to build more? So, you know, like he's gonna want his upfront cost waived, and if you're just gonna take, and he's gonna sell it, and the property taxes are gonna be the benefit of the person that actually owns the building, which is different than the non-residential tax exemption, which goes directly to the guy that's building. So what's the mechanism for how this incentivizes the developer? Can somebody explain that to me?
Administration,
But he doesn't, he's not gonna own this property.
Through the chair, this is exactly the same as the non-residential tax incentive. So the developer of a private business may or may not be the same person who's gonna own it. You know, residential is a little bit different because typically, you know, the person who's building it won't be the person who occupies it, not always, but most of the time. But it's the same mechanism, it pretty much mirrors the non-residential tax incentives. So it may not be the same person, but it's the same process as non-residential.
Well, I totally understand that. I'm just asking how that gets the guy to wanna build if he's not gonna own the property at the end of it.
Yeah,
So I understand that I totally understand what it is. I just, how does that motivate a person to wanna build something?
through the chair, and well, you really have two ways of going about it, right? It's either you have the demand, or you build it and then you try to sell it, or somebody comes and says, I would like to buy it, for example, right? And you know, and if you have those incentives, maybe you'll get a higher demand for building new. You know, because building new as of right now is very expensive. This is really just about incentivizing demand.
Councillor Haas, then Stashik.
And I guess how I see this is, it's not the developer that's building it, it's the owner that's building it. It would be like me going out and buying a parcel of land, and I wanna build a new home, so I'm gonna hire this company, whoever, to build me my home. I'm gonna pay them whatever it costs to build the home, whatever it costs for the servicing or whatever. And then I get the benefit of the tax exemption, which means they get everything they want, they get the business, they get the build. Then I get the incentive where my $4,000 or $5,000 a year taxes are exempt for X amount of time. So this is how I'm seeing this, that it's not benefiting necessarily the developer. It's incentivizing people to come in, just like if it was an apartment building, somebody comes in and says, I want to invest in the town of Hinton, build an apartment. I want to hire you as the developer to build it for me. I'm gonna pay you and I'll get the exemption. That's how I see this fit.
Yeah, and through the chair, I guess your other option, somebody comes in, builds an apartment, you know, without no demand, they just built it and said, I'll build it, they'll come. You know, that's the other option. Well, when you sell the property, you're selling it with the tax exemption attached as to the property as well, right?
Right.
So you have that value added when you're selling it as well.
So that's the other incentive, is that I develop it, I'm not gonna sit on it necessarily, because then I've got something that I can incentivize this sale. You can buy this and then you get also this incentive as well.
Yeah.
So, you know, so I think that's my understanding of this, to, I guess, to Councilor Taylor's question, that's how I see it, so.
Councillor Stashik, then myself.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think that's a great question, because it's one of the things that I struggled with too. Not so much for apartments, because I can't see that there would be a builder out there that would build an apartment on speculation. And to me, that would be an owner who sees an opportunity to have an apartment building, hire a builder to build it for them, and then they can realize the tax exemption benefit in whatever way is, you know, most appropriate for them. The challenge I see though is for multifamily resident, well, maybe not multifamily residential, but entry-level housing though. Lots of entry-level housing could potentially be built on speculation, and if the builder isn't going, if they can't realize some type of savings that helps them offset the cost of construction, the tax exemption isn't gonna work to incentivize those people to build new entry-level housing. So that's a part of the conversation that I'm interested in hearing about. The intent is to incentivize that new construction, and if the method that we choose isn't actually gonna incentivize a builder to build something, it's not gonna work. So I don't have concerns about the apartment building for the reasons I said, but I do have concerns about some of the other ones. Entry-level housing is already passed. Long-term rental, single detached, all those things if they become areas of focus that council wants to consider, how do you make that incentivization actually work for the builder? Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Ostashikov, myself, the mayor, and Councilor Taylor. I'm also concerned with that too. Again, I don't actually think apartments, are the area of concern for this one. But again, it's how do you take a developer who builds houses and how do you give them an incentive to actually build a house before it's been sold, right? Or even if you have it built on spec for an entry level, you know, individual or a couple who are purchasing it. So how do you then go and convince a developer to fast track your build if they're not realizing any kind of incentive in that build process? So I could do any development, but you want me to do yours because you get a tax break? Yeah, no, I'm not doing that. It doesn't make sense to me. Right, that was one of the things that jumped into mind. The builders there has to be an incentive to make it smart for them to do that business. And I'll withdraw from there because it's too easy to get off track. Mr. Mayor, Councilor Taylor.
Thank you. And to the comments abound, especially Councilor Stashik's comment about the entry-level housing. If we're looking at mimicking our non-residential bylaw where it's 100% exempt in year one, 100% in year two, 75 year three, 50% year four, 25% year five. I see, especially for entry-level housing, a great incentive towards building on spec, because when you build on spec, you have to carry that. That's the problem as developers. You're carrying the cost of insuring that home that you built on spec, powering it, utilities and municipal taxes. This, what we're talking about here, takes 100% off in year one, 100% off in year two. That gives a developer who built on spec the opportunity to sell that home without carrying the property taxes for 2 years. That gives them, I think, more incentive to build on spec. And so I think that this actually does answer your question to the entry-level houses for certain. Again, I think apartments, this is moot and I will support this consensus on the day. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councilor Taylor?
Yeah, I'm happy to go ahead because this isn't gonna do any harm no matter what. But the answer I get consistently when I talk to people, or I don't know if anybody's actually talked to a developer as to whether this would work and help them. Sure, if I'm just talking one house, like Councilor Paul is talking about, sure, it might help one, and I'm gonna own the house. But we're talking like a block of houses and you want me to come in and do all of Laurel Point and there's gonna be 20 units. Is this really gonna help? Who's gonna talk to a couple of developers about what kind of incentives are gonna work? Or are we just all sitting here, non-developers, sort of guessing at it? But I mean, it's not gonna do any harm, it's just whether it'll work or not, that's the only question.
I guess,
So has anybody in administration gone and talked to developers and seen what's gonna work, and this is gonna work, and that's why we're even looking at it?
Edmund?
Through the chair, if council would like to look at a developer incentive package, that would require direction, but the direction that council's provided is to look at a residential tax incentives. So that's what we brought forward.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Okay, Councilor Haas.
Well, and I don't wanna go too far into this, but I mean. It is a good question, but it's something that's brand new, right? We've never had this opportunity before, so. Exactly, and I don't even know if the developers would, because we've never had this opportunity before, so I think I agree with Councilor Taylor. I mean, it's not gonna do any harm, but it's also an opportunity. The discussion has started. Developers, whomever are gonna be listening to this, and, you know, knowing what's coming, I'm sure we'll get, you know, some input from them on the future discussion, but this is something new. They've never experienced it either, so it's gonna be one of those growing, you know, things, you know, to get it right. So, but I still think I'm along the same lines of the mayor, you know, there are some costs, and that's what sometimes delays the development, because they don't wanna take on those added extra costs and sit on them. So this to me helps with that as well. So I think there are some benefits, but I think it depends on how we draft this. moving forward, so, thank you.
Edmund?
Through the chair to council, one of the things I've heard, we had a developer meeting back in early 2022. And one of the consistent things I've heard at that meeting was it's the saturation rate in terms of housing has been less than 2%, if not less than not today. The upfront cost is what's discouraging them from wanting to put their own dollars into it. The third part to that is there are no granting that you could say that they could get to put the viability forward. So for them, they kind of gun shy. We have talked to some developers in the past, after the developers meeting, those that own land you stole that's based in Edmonton. We actually reached out to come back, even the town it's a new town, everything else. And we heard it consistently that it's the upfront cost. So to Councillor Taylor's question is that what can we further do? This is a good thing we're talking about to help abate that upfront cost is not paid upfront, so that by the time they're waiting for it to change hands or to sell it, that's when they realize the profits and the return on investment is earlier than maybe waiting 10 or 15 years.
Council? I don't have anybody else in the speakers queue. We do have a consensus request on the floor. Any final discussion before we call the question? Seeing none, we will call the question as soon as it pops up. We'll call the question that committee seek consensus to include apartment builds under this bylaw. Council, please vote now. Councillor Taylor in favor, that is carried unanimously. Thank you very much, council. Council, Councillor Race.
Thank you, sir. To admin, with multifamily residential, would that be condos, townhouses, duplexes, triplexes?
Through the chair, yes, all of the above.
Like a Happy Creek,
Yeah,
Project?
as well as apartments and others, yeah.
okay. So, I'd like to, that committee seek consensus to include multifamily residential. And I do have to add, I did talk to 3 developers today. They're very eager to hear what comes out of this meeting tonight.
Okay, council, any discussion on the consensus request on the floor? Seeing none, we'll call the question that committee seek consensus to include multifamily residential. You can please vote now. Councillor Taylor in favor. In favor. That is carried unanimously. Thank you very much. Council, floor is open. Councillor Hawes.
I think move that we include long-term rentals in the bylaw.
Councillor, oh, sorry, I'm gonna give Councillor Hawes a chance to speak to it, then I'll put Councillor Ostashik in queue.
Yeah, I think, this is another area where, some people need apartments, they need long-term rentals that are a larger, area. Families and things, this incentivizes some of that, and I'm looking forward to administration coming back with what definitions those set for, so.
Councillor Ostashik.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That would be my question actually, is what would a long-term rental be that's not an apartment that wouldn't be restrictive to what that owner could do with it in the future? For example, somebody builds a property with the intent that it's going to be a long-term rental, let's say like it's an up-down legal suite that they're intending to rent out, but then they want to sell it at some point in the future, and the person who wants to buy it doesn't want to have it as a rental, they want to buy it and live there and have their I don't know, family member live in the downstairs suite. So I guess what what would be a long-term rental that's not an apartment that wouldn't restrict those types of sales?
Edmund?
So, through the chair, like a hypothetical could be maybe somebody builds a home for under $400,000 with the intent of that this is going to be for a long-term rental. Long-term rentals really to me would be more of a condition of, you would, throughout the course of, if you qualify under this umbrella or this condition, then it would have to be provided as a long-term rental for the course of the tax exemptions. Once the tax exemptions, or if, if something changes in the meantime and, you sell it and somebody, for example, just wants to, come in and live in it or provide it as a short-term rental, then you'd probably be, in violations of the conditions. And those tax exemptions would cancel. But maybe the example of being a unit under 400 wasn't the wrong one, because I would already qualify, but, possibly the one that would be over.
Councillor Ostashik, you wanted a clarification?
Follow it. if I
Please.
may. Yeah, that sounds overly complex. And then, if there's a condition on title that it remains a rental property in perpetuity, that could be problematic and complicated too. And having it only for the term of the tax exemption, that's problematic in the sense that somebody could use it as a loophole to build something, realize the tax exemption for 5 years, and then, one day beyond the 5-year mark, they list it for sale for a different purpose other than what they just realized 5 years tax exemption on. So I'm not sure I'd support this one. I need a better understanding of how it would work and what it would entail other than apartment buildings. Thank you.
Edmund, did you want to comment on that?
Just one clarification is we would not be actually putting, like, for example, a restrictive covenant on the title for this. This would really be managed through the bylaw process of, and we would have some possibly requirements to prove that, you're doing what you said you were going to do originally. But we wouldn't actually have something on title that would restrict this property in perpetuity. I don't know. There would be a limit to that authority. It may not be the term of the tax exemptions, but there would certainly be a limit, a reasonable limit on that authority.
I could follow.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's kind of what I was getting at in saying that it sounds complex without having something filed on title to ensure that it was a rental property in perpetuity, which is complex and we don't want to do and we don't want to get into. It creates the loophole of using the tax exemption and then just flipping it as just a regular residential property. So, yeah, thank you. I appreciate the clarification too.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor, Councillor Hawes, Councillor Taylor.
Thank you through Chair Committee. I'll be supporting this because, to Councillor House's point, I am interested to see what the definitions come back in the draft. But to Councillor Stashik's concerns, I think overcomplicating this is a risk. The scenario that I see where this could be very useful is, again, incentivizing the creation of secondary suites in existing residences. If I were to put myself in the hypothetical shoes of a homeowner today that wanted to have a legal secondary suite, you could renovate your basement, put a legal suite in the backyard, apply for this tax incentive, and from a municipality standpoint, I think we absolutely want to incentivize long-term rental suites and secondary suites in our existing properties. But at the same time, if that same person decided next year to apply for a short-term rentals license, I would like to see the tax incentive pulled because it's no longer a long-term rental use, but still an absolutely appropriate use in our community. And in this hypothetical case, council has now incentivized the increasing number of units in our community in a way that I do believe is sustainable, because increasing density with secondary suites is probably the easiest way for a town to grow. So I think there are scenarios where long-term rentals do make sense, and I'm very interested to see what the definitions that administration can come up with are when this comes back. Thank you.
Councillor Hawes, Councillor Taylor.
Yeah, and I just wanna speak to quickly that, you know, I do see definitely what some councilors have mentioned on this, the logistics of it, but I hope that, you know, realizing this is just the first kick at the can and give administration the time to dig into this one a little bit deeper and think about and come up with something I think is a reasonable ask. Maybe we run into that the long-term rentals is not necessarily the best way to go about it, and we make those decisions later, but I hope the rest of council, you know, supports this, so that at least we can take a look at it later with administration's, report, so, thank you.
Councillor Taylor?
Yeah, I'm not clear on this, so I think I'm with you. I'd like to see what this comes out as, because helps build, secondary suites, something like that, and that, seems to add to housing, so interesting to see where this fits. I'm not sure what it fits right now.
Thank you, Councillor. Council, any further discussion on this? Seeing none, then we'll just get it up before us, and then we'll call to question. Council, we will call to question that committee seek consensus to include long-term rentals in the bylaw. Council, if you can please vote now. Councillor Taylor in favor. And the mayor in favor. That is oddly showing 0-0. Is that doing that for you too?
Yeah.
Council, let's take that, just by hand, please. All those in favor, please. That is carried unanimously, and then we'll just give Ms. Davy Campbell. Oh, there we go. Okay, thank you. Technology is wonderful. Council, the floor, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. I'd like to see consensus to include secondary suites bylaw.
Mr. Mayor, do you want to speak to it while it's being captured?
I think I've spoken to secondary suites a couple of times today. I think that they're a great way to increase population density and increase housing stock in existing communities.
Council, any discussion on that while we're capturing that? Councillor Ostasher.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mayor Nissen made a great point actually in discussing the long-term rentals option a minute ago is what's preventing people from taking advantage of this secondary suite and renting it out until the tax exemption expires and then turning it into a short-term rental? What's the mechanism that can be in place to ensure that the exemptions that we're putting in place are actually gonna achieve the ends that we're trying to achieve long-term? I don't know if anybody has an answer to that, but it's certainly something that's a question that's worth considering and concerning for me.
Mr. Mayor, you'd like to respond?
Thank you, and Councilor Stashik, I think it's a great question, and at this point, it's very important that we see this bylaw come back. And I think, I know the recommendations say back to council, but I think we bring this back to committee so that we can discuss when we have all of these definitions in there. In my mind, I think with secondary suites specifically, I think there's low risk of giving a tax incentive on the additional assessment. We're really talking about relatively small values. And if that helps somebody install a secondary suite in their basement, as long as, in my mind, as long as they're utilizing it as a long-term rental, so they haven't gotten a short-term rentals license, they're not doing that Airbnb style thing, I see no issues with giving them 5 years worth of tax incentive, but as this is roughly lined out. But should they change the use? Absolutely. I'm not interested in giving a tax incentive to a short-term rental. Specifically with secondary suites, I see this as a potential mechanism to get secondary suites built. And I'm more interested in that than really policing the long-term use of secondary suites in our community. Because I think realistically, as people move to the community and purchase and buy houses, secondary suites will go from long-term rentals to in-law suites to short-term rentals, and that's kind of how things go. But if the infrastructure doesn't get built in our community, we don't have those suites, then they're not being utilized at all. And so for these specifically, I'm less concerned about the change in the use for apartments, condos, entry-level housing. Change in use does concern me a lot more. So I hope that helps as this go forward, but I'm very, very excited to see this come back to committee in the future. Thank you.
Councillor Haas?
Yeah, you know, and I hear what you're saying, Councillor Sajik. I think one of the things though that I think would be an incentive for some people. There are some people that are interested in Airbnbs or short-term rentals. Then there are others that have no interest whatsoever, but would like to have that secondary income to help with the mortgage. Cause they don't wanna clean it every 2 days because someone's coming in. They don't want that headache. They want someone else. You clean the suite, it's your suite, you pay me rent. And I really think that, especially in the days of the economy the way it is, if we have an incentive to incentivize that secondary suite, I think we might see more people potentially taking advantage of that with long-term rentals to offset their mortgages. Cause I personally have no desire to clean up after people every few days or every day, but I would be more than happy to consider if I had the structure and the infrastructure to consider long-term, because then, yeah, I don't have to deal with all those. So I think there are some people that would do that and with no desire to ever to be short-term. So those are my thoughts anyway. So I am interested to see this too, as part of the bylaw.
Thank you, Councillor Haas. Council, I have no one in the speaker's queue. One last check before we call the question. Seeing none, we will call the question that committee seek consensus to include secondary suites in the bylaw. Council, if you could please vote now. Councillor Taylor in favor. That is carried unanimously. Councillor Taylor?
Would these be secondary suites on like, expensive houses? Would these be secondary suites in like entry-level houses?
Edmund?
Through the chair, to me, if this is gonna be a separate category, that if you install a secondary suite in any home, the secondary suite portion would likely be exempt.
Anyhow.
Councillor Haas?
So just a quick clarification again on the tiny homes, that we currently have where it's a secondary suite, basically you can build on it. But what you were saying is this could potentially, if we had an area of land, somebody wanted to have a community of tiny homes set up on there, then this could also, not on wheels, but on that, like permanent structures, but are tiny, that have all the requirements of building codes and all that kind of stuff. Cause currently people could do that right now in our community.
It would be, it would be permitted right now to go in and put it as a secondary suite. We have it structured, so it's very easy for us to say yes in the right scenario. If somebody comes to us and says, I wanna do like a whole subdivision of tiny homes, where we can just say, it's DC, it's tiny homes, it's already defined as such, and we're off to the races. So with really one land use bylaw amendment, we could allow it. We could, in whatever parcel that we think it would make sense in.
So if we added this, that would then activate the need to change the land use bylaw as well. If we were to include this in this bylaw. Is that what you were saying? Sorry, I mean.
No, sorry, I was just talking about how we would authorize those.
Oh,
ones,
okay.
But I believe with the consensus that we provided for units under 400,000, I think we, to some degree, cover tiny homes and mobile homes.
Okay.
Cause, I don't see a scenario where tiny homes typically would be over that 400,000 mark or,
Right.
yeah.
And that's, from my experience and look into them, they're more money than they used to be, but because they've become popular, but yeah, usually they're under that. So would you like, if you're saying it's under units under 400,000, then we don't have to include the tiny, you would automatically include that as a definition in the definition?
Yeah, I through the chair, if I could, what might be helpful is, if we don't want a certain type of home, you know, because under 400 is one of the broad categories, so a lot could fit under it. But for example, if we don't want to subsidize tiny homes or mobile homes or any other type of housing, you know, we can make a consensus to exclude, you know, because we can make specific exclusions as well.
Right, okay. Okay, I'll leave it at that then, thank you.
Mr. Mayor?
Thank you, and through the chair to administration, I have a question regarding mobile homes. And it came, mobile homes, tiny homes, same sort of developments. Existingly, we have our mobile home parks in town, they're private land. We tax the mobile park owner, but we also tax the individual mobile homeowners. The situation you just mentioned that just came to my mind is I believe that some of those mobile homes turn over in terms of the home relatively frequently. Do you see anything that we should direct one way or another regarding the mobile homes in parks specifically?
Through the chair, this is one of the unique ones that we had to, we're gonna probably have to bring in legal for this. But generally speaking, this is for development, of these. So development for a mobile home, you know, the barrier to entry might be a little bit lower where you can probably pull one on and get it established, connected to the utility services. And by my definition, to me, that would be the development of that parcel. And, you know, unless there's something saying that they couldn't apply for tax exemptions, you know, if you brought in a new unit, you hooked it up, that would trigger, or you would have the ability to apply for tax exemptions. But new owners doesn't renew your ability to get tax incentives.
Thank you, and if I may comment.
Please.
As this goes forward, I'm not sure how I feel about that. I think there is some risk in those, mobile home parks specifically on our entry level housing, entry here, but I'm curious to see what the legal opinion is and what the draft bylaw comes back at. So I'm gonna leave it there for now. Thank you.
Yeah, please.
Through the chair, if I could. The other thing that we have done for our non-residential specific to, I believe it was tax exemption B, is that we've said that once you have one tax exemption, you can't get another. So that's an option as well. You know, for something like mobile home parks where, you know, there may, you know, the units may be pulled off and pulled on a little bit more freely, we can always look at that a little bit closer, put some parameters around it.
Councillor Ostashik.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And actually, I'd like to continue that discussion actually, so. I'm going to seek consensus of committee to exclude mobile homes from the tax exemption, residential tax exemption program. If I could speak to it.
Please.
I think we've learned from experience that the legislation governing how mobile home parks are managed makes it extremely cumbersome for a municipality to be able to govern them, lease them, manage them appropriately. I think by including mobile homes in a tax exemption program might be opening up a whole other can of worms that I've thought of 4 or 5 different ways just in the minute that I've been turning it over in my mind, how that could be manipulated to in a negative way. I just as soon at this point not explore an option for tax exemptions for mobile homes at this point. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ostashik. Council, any discussion on that? Seeing none, then we'll call the question that committee seek consensus to exclude mobile homes from the bylaw. Council, if you could please vote now. Councillor Taylor voting against. And that is carried 5-1 with Councillor Taylor against. guess, I'll put myself in speaker's queue next. Sort of my hope, just trying to stimulate movement, we'll see what happens. I'd actually like to see the same sort of inclusion of tiny homes into the bylaw for myself. I actually think that's a bit of an untapped area, and even further than that, I'd like to see it included in the land use bylaw permanently. I think it's a bit of a more modern tool, and it can actually hit a demographic of people who are looking for a lower priced entry level standalone residence who might otherwise sort of be forced into the apartment market. So, I think about individuals on a single income, but we're making money. No, why shouldn't? I think that can serve as a tool. I don't need to get into it any more than that, other than it's being used in other communities. Councillor Haas.
Sorry, Catch, you wanted that included, correct? Yeah, I do too, and I think the reason I didn't put forward a motion or a direction to include it is because of CEO Panasic's entry-level housing conversation, that it would be included in that. But I do agree that, from that, making it something in our land use bylaw, I think I would also like to have that conversation later as to how that could be more of a permanent, not just a one-off thing, but because I do believe, there are some individuals who don't want to invest a large amount of money in their home, but still have a nice home that's affordable, that's, in a community, and they're not, house heavy, basically, right? So I think there is a great advantage to that, and, so because it's gonna be added to this bylaw, I imagine, or I hope that it would trigger then a future conversation as well. Thank you.
I guess I'll just, as a point of clarification, my concern is, really, we could have included a lot under the premise of entry level under $400,000. I think if we name it specifically, then it demonstrates the will of council to administration that this is an area of exploration that we'd like Itman to consider moving forward. And then I think also the land use bylaw more specifically. Councillor Hosmer.
Okay, so you don't have to go out of the chair position. I want to move to include tiny homes in the land use bylaw. Cause I fully agree with this, and I don't want it missed either. I want it captured. So I'll make that motion to that direction.
Thank you, Councillor.
And I would like to speak to it
Please.
because I have talked to tiny home builders, and there is a niche for it, but they don't have the opportunities and communities to build. And I think that they are looking for a community to start building in. Now, these are builders that do put them on wheels, typically, but I think that the niche of being a stationary place, I think that, that would be quite an incentive for some of these developers to do, so, yeah.
Councillor Ostashik.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm a bit on the fence about the tiny homes thing. There's a lot of municipalities that have considered it, but there seems to be a reluctance for municipalities to approve tiny home subdivisions. I don't know who might have an answer for it, but I'd look to administration, I guess. Is there any reason, any precedents why municipalities might be resistant to tiny homes developments?
Admin?
Yeah, and Mr. McLaughlin might have a more detailed answer, but to my knowledge, tiny homes have actually been, it has not been a very, bustling market in part because the Alberta building codes has never actually caught up to the uniqueness of what tiny homes are. And that's still under development today, where they're still making certain exceptions, but there's quite a few exceptions that you have to have when it comes to a tiny home unit. I believe that the current government is making changes to the Alberta building code to accommodate for this type of development, and they're getting closer to having everything cleared up. But in the past, I know that tiny homes simply just didn't comply with the existing building code, and so most municipalities kind of shied away from it.
Mr. McLaughlin?
Yeah, I think the reason we put it through the way we did is with just a tiny home on its own, on a lot, I think can come with some, not in my backyard, problems and, we didn't want to just make that allowed throughout any residential area. If someone has just built their own $700,000 home and then to see a $50,000 tiny home go in beside them, that's gonna turn over quite often. It just doesn't build the community that they thought they were building, and so that's why we did it the way we did it, is that if someone comes forward and said, you know what, we found the perfect piece of land, then we can still do that approval with what we've already passed by making it direct control. And it also gives the community a chance to come forward during that process to have their say on the change to the land use. Whereas if you just blanket allow them, I do worry about the reaction of one going in beside somebody.
I have myself and then Counselor Hawes. And for myself, that's why I think everybody can imagine in their heads, and I just pulled up some examples of, CCAN homes as an example. There's a huge difference between a CCAN development that looks futuristic or sleek and well-developed, and a box with wheels on it that somebody drops into a property. So I actually think it comes down to, as a community, what sorts of policies do we have in place to make sure that any potential development looks and feels right and fits well, whether it be through direct control, although for me, that seems like a lot of work. If you're gonna repeat that over and over again, I think your better approach is to have some good policies around it, so that it can fit. So to Councillor Ostashik's concerns, like moving forward, what might this look like? For myself, I think it really does come down to the land use, and how we build this into our community moving forward. And I'll just leave it at that. Councillor Hawes and Councillor Ostashik.
Yeah, I appreciate that, and in talking to some of the tiny home buyers, that attitude of it's on wheels, they can pick it up and pull it. I think that was the attitude a lot of communities also had in mind, and thankfully, the current government is looking at, reestablish or revising those building codes. There's also been some concern on insurance as well, because that is another factor that was part of it. But I mean, when I look at our previous discussion and I look at the infill, for example, on attachment 3, I look at that piece by Mountain Street there, that long, narrow stretch there, what's really gonna go there, right? But this could be an area where not a lot can go there, but possibly those, and could create a community of them. So I think there's some opportunity there, and if we would be, I realize other municipalities may have not done it, but one of the things when I talk to the builders is they're looking for a community to start setting up in and getting some word of mouth out, and hopefully getting other municipalities on board as well. So I think, and one of the things they've mentioned too is a Hinton town is a perfect community for tiny homes. It is an absolute perfect area for what people are looking for. It's outdoors, it's not a lot of amenities they're looking for, and cause they're not looking at spending a lot of money in a home, so. But anyway, so yeah, that's why I'm open to improve this. Thank you.
Councillor Ostashik?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I have concerns. I would have serious concerns about tiny homes being permitted anywhere within the community. And I also think that this already fits underneath, I know it's already been said, but I think this already fits underneath the umbrella of the less than $400,000 development and can be managed through direct control. So if somebody has a proposal to come forward to build a tiny home subdivision, then it could be considered by council at that time. It could be presented, and council could at that time decide if that's something that they feel would be appropriate in the community or not. I'd much rather go about it that way than to a direct administration to focus on bringing tiny homes, standalone tiny homes forward. through this tax exemption program? Thanks.
Council? Councilor Taylor?
We want to make sure I understand this. So the wording of that is that you're gonna go away, you're gonna come back and come with a plan, put tiny homes, throughout Hinton. Perhaps next, nice houses that people own, they're gonna have a little tiny home beside them.
Admin?
Through,
That's
Sorry,
not,
through-
that's not related.
sorry, through the chair, was the motion to include it in the land use bylaw
No.
or the tax incentives bylaw?
Oh, it's in the tax incentive bylaw.
Yeah.
Sorry, I missed that.
Okay.
Yeah,
No, that was my understanding, but
yeah.
I take back my questions, never worded.
Yes.
No, that's fine.
If I may.
Yeah, please, Councilor.
I think it came up because if in the future we wanted to do that, but right now to investigate the idea of it as an incentive, a tax incentive, but I don't, Councilor Goon was talking about, at some later date, maybe putting it in the land use bylaw. That's where, yeah.
No problem, I'm just going with the wording and what I had to vote on.
Yeah, fair enough.
Council? We'll just clarify the wording, that committee seek consensus to include tiny homes in the incentive bylaw. Any further discussion before calling that to question? Seeing none, then we'll call it to question, that committee seek consensus to include tiny homes in the tax incentive bylaw. If you can please vote now. Councilor Taylor's in favor. And that is carried 5-1 with Councilor Oskachik against. Council, the speaker's queue is free. Councilor Hawes.
I don't know if we're ready yet, but I'm prepared to move on to number 3 of the questions that the CEO has asked of us, if that's okay with you, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we're open at this point.
Okay, so I'd like to move that the appropriate duration be 5 years. I'm just gonna leave it at that because the fourth is on how much, right? So we'll just stick with the 5 years at this point.
That's good. Council? So the consensus request on the floor is that the duration of the tax incentive would be for 5 years. Councilor Hawes, do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, if I can speak to it real quickly, I think first it mirrors the non-residential exemptions, but the other, I think, is to Mayor Nissen's point a while back in regards to an incentive for the developer, having a period of time that you can benefit from this if they haven't sold it or whatever. I think the longer we can do it, the better. And then we can have a more fulsome conversation on the amounts afterwards, but I think that's a reasonable amount. I would never be in favor of like more than 5, so.
Council, any discussion on this? Seeing none, we'll call it to question that council seek consensus that the appropriate duration of the tax incentive bylaw will be for 5 years. Council, if you can please vote now. Councilor Taylor voting in favor.
Still having issues. In
Okay.
favor.
That is carried unanimously. Thank you very much, council. Council, floor is open. We would be looking then at question 4, fully or partially exempted and deferred. Councilor, Haas.
Yeah, I think to start the conversation, I'll move that the recommendation, the current residential bylaw be 100% year 1, 100% year 2, and then 75% year 3, 50 year 4, and 25% year 5. So again, mirroring that are non-residential, but to residential. And if I can speak to it,
Please.
it's incentivized, it's 100% for the first 2 years, and then, then they've got a couple of years to benefit from that, and then, obviously reduces after that, but I think that's a reasonable incentive for this bylaw. Thank you.
I have a question for administration. So admin, in terms of that process of building out, say spec build, as the mayor had mentioned earlier. So really in those first 2 years then, as the value of that property is increasing because the housing unit is being built, that additional tax burden that would be deferred over the course of that, say that building year or whatever, is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah,
Okay.
and we'll have to actually specify when we authorize them to apply as well, so that might factor into it a little bit as well, but with the understanding of, while it's being built and, the years following that it would be exempt.
Okay, sounds good. Council? Consensus request on the floor, any discussion on that? Seeing none, then when it pops up, we will call to question.
Want to mirror the.
Yeah. Yes, the non-residential wanted to mirror that, so. Hundred, 75, 50. 25.
Yes.
Yeah. Councilor Hawes, just to be clarification, does that represent what you intended?
Just to put in the residential somewhere in there. Committee consensus, see consensus that the residential tax incentive is, and that'll be good.
Council? Last chance, any discussion on that?
Chairman, I just try to improve the word.
Sure.
And exemption. Oh, exemptions.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Are you good with the wording on that, Councilor Hawes?
Yeah.
Okay. Council, we'll wait for it to appear. While it's appearing, any last discussion? Seeing none, we'll call the question that committee see consensus that the residential tax incentive is an exemption of 100% year one, 100% year two, 75% year three, 50% year four, and 25% year five. Council, if you can please vote now. Councilor Taylor in favor. And that is carried unanimously. Thank you very much, council. Any other criteria for discussion, council, or anything to discuss? Councilor Ostashik.
Yeah, I do have a question for administration. When this comes back, is there going to be something in there about timing for when the exemption is implemented? Is it? So for example, can a builder apply for it and then it starts as soon as they get a development permit for construction? Or can a homeowner who is looking to build a home, they're going to hire a builder, and they apply for it so that the exemption starts on the day that they take possession? How's that gonna work? And then the other thing that is still a big concern for me is how to incentivize developers and builders to build properties on speculation. Because, with all due respect, I understand that the builder has the ability to apply for the tax exemption while they're doing construction. But I don't feel that tax exemption is going to be substantial enough that it's going to be a deciding factor for whether a builder chooses to build a property or not. I'm assuming that during construction, that property actually has fairly low value until it's finished. So their tax incentive advantage is gonna be a few $100, $1,500 through the construction process until the property's complete and it's valued at $350,000, $400,000. So I would like to see something that's in the tax incentive bylaw to be able to make sure that a builder or developer is actually properly incentivized to build a property and get it brought to market, because that's the whole purpose of doing this, is try to increase the housing stock. And without being able to, without incentivizing people that are actually doing the building on speculation, I'm not sure it's gonna have a huge impact.
Councillor Taylor, then myself.
Yeah, I said that 45 minutes ago. That we're not gonna do any harm, we're not gonna do much good. Well, what I think we're looking for is, and the town manager said that it was a separate process, that's what I got out of him. We're looking to seek consensus that administration bring forward a report on incentives for developers for residential developments. Something like that. So what are we gonna do? Cause I'd like, could be, how are we gonna do an upfront cost? I'd like to get aggressive on this, to go around to developers, outside of Hinton, inside of Hinton, and to have something to offer. We'd like you to come to Hinton, here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna help you with 50% of the upfront cost, or whatever it is. You have to have something to offer. We offer this, and we go outside, and they're just, I don't think that's gonna do anything. So I think we challenge administration to come back with, those kind of incentives for developers, for residential development. Just like we did with this. And I think that'll be more meaningful than what we just spent 45 minutes doing.
I have myself in queue next. I think, to Councillor Ostashik's point, I would still like to see council, make a direction specific to exactly what you just said, to the point of, and I understand this is the first report, but I would like to push a little bit and say, no, like the goal of council, understanding that until that property is sold, it's in the hands of the developer, therefore they pay taxes on it. I would really like a sober second consideration about, is there truly no tax incentives for that residential lot to be gained through this process that might encourage development? And if the second answer to that is no, we've considered it again, no, okay, fine. But I really have the same concerns as both Councillor Taylor and Councillor Ostashik, is that unless we really motivate building to occur, as Councillor Ostashik said, on speculation, again, that would be a missed opportunity for me. And I'd like to be able to tell members of the public, no, we really explored that, right? We're trying to find incentives for developers to build on spec. Council, I have no one else in queue. Councillor Taylor?
Is there a motion up there?
There is not.
Oh, could I put seek consensus of administration, bring back a report on incentives or options to encourage developers on building residential developments? That's what I think we're talking about.
Administration, once it's up on the screen, if we can just get your opinion on it.
Sure. Not fussy on wording.
Administration, how do you feel about that wording? What sorts of tools is it gonna be?
Well, to encourage developers on residential developments, I think that's what we're talking about, encouraging. We've already got business development as covered, so. And it doesn't have to be a tax incentive, it could be something else. You know what I'm saying? Be a offsetting costs, upfront costs, could be something like that.
Admin?
Yeah, to the chair, no, that looks good to me.
Okay. Council, any discussion on this? Councillor Ostashik?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm supportive of this. This is a challenging thing though, because it's not just encouraging developers to build a residential development, it's to actually build houses on it as well. and get them to market. So if you're incentivizing the residential development construction, they might build a subdivision, but then there's no incentive for them to build houses on it. So the subdivision sits empty for 12 years, like you said. So it needs to be, I feel it needs to be more encompassing than just the development. It needs to get all the way to the construction of the finished homes. And it's challenging because sometimes the developer is the builder, sometimes they're not, sometimes they're both. I look forward to seeing what's coming, and I am supportive of this. Thank you.
I have myself next. I wonder if maybe just the addition of, and again, I can't make this sort of direction, but maybe there might be an amendment that says, encourage developers on residential developments with a focus on delivering finished homes. You know, something to that effect, to be more specific, because I would agree with Councillor Stasher. Edmund, I saw your hand. Would you like to comment?
No, through the chair, I was just gonna recommend, it could be finished homes or it could be housing units or some wording if we want to be specific on the actual vertical development, not the horizontal development, then I would require some clarification.
Councillor Taylor, well, do you want additional clarification, or sorry, do you want to change the wording or modify the wording as recommended by the CAO?
Well, yeah, my thinking is that you can't force economics. You gotta look at how much, homes are built. Can't force somebody to build a huge number of homes on spec, but you can't encourage them to start the development. Like I said, you look at how long the Russell Creek development took, you look how long the Thompson Lake development took. These are things that took a long time to develop, so you can't force them beyond the natural speed at which people are gonna buy houses. But I think what we need to do is encourage somebody to come and at least start the development so we can start getting homes built.
Council? Councillor Stashik?
I would like to propose an amendment. I'm not sure how to word it though. Because I do feel that whatever that incentivization is, it needs to be focused on having housing stock available to the market. Not anything prior to that. But they're all related though, right? Like I said, that's a tough egg to crack. And I'm not sure what the amendment would be. I'd look to administration for some advice.
Edmund?
I would just say that developers for, and then instead of residential developments, just for housing units. I think that's specific enough to say this is the type of development that we're looking at.
Councillor Stashik?
I'm fine with that as an amendment, but I do have a question though too. Seeing how subdivision development and the construction of housing units is all related. You can incentivize building housing units, but if there's no lots available to build them on, does that give administration enough leeway to be able to try and incentivize the whole process all the way from greenfield right through subdivision development and then housing unit construction?
Through the chair and members of council. I don't have the answer right now, but I like, well, whatever we bring forward, it's not going to be, an incentive that they get the tail end when they've sold the property and they've made their money, right? That's not when they need their incentive. I know what I want to accomplish. I don't know what the solution is, just sitting here, but I understand. I have a good understanding of what we would need to get to.
I can follow up. I think administration has a pretty clear understanding what council's intent is. with the motion, so I'm fine with that amendment. Leaving it that, it's fine.
Councillor Taylor,
That's clarification.
please.
So you come in and you wanna do a development for, say, 30 or 40 units. Are you envisioning only an incentive, for the, if initially you can only build 5 houses? You're envisioning that whatever the incentive would be prorated to the amount of houses that you built. It wouldn't be to help you with the, larger upfront costs to get the development. Is that what you're thinking?
Councillor
Maybe
Ostache,
follow up.
please.
That's the concern that I was just communicating to administration, is that they're all related, so there has to be a way to be able to incentivize the subdivision development so that the properties are available to build the housing units on, but then also to be able to incentivize the construction of housing units so that they're available to market.
Concern is probably the same as yours, because if you're just worried about the only paying out if you build 5 actual houses, then that's not enough to encourage anything. It's gotta be a broader incentive.
If I may.
Please.
Yeah, and that's what the conversation was with administration a minute ago, and I think they have a clear understanding of the intent of what council's trying to achieve here. And I'm confident that they'll bring back something that's encompasses that. I think they're understanding the concerns.
Just think it has to be something that when you go around aggressively outside of this town to get developers to come to town, it wakes somebody up to want to come to Hinton. Or get a developer to do something, if it's not that. Just. That we didn't do anything.
Let's see here. Council, we do have an amendment on the floor to the consensus request. There we go. The amendment is to eliminate on residential developments and replace it with 4 housing units. Council, any last discussion? Seeing none, we'll call the question. If you can please vote now. Councillor Taylor in favor. And that is, we're just waiting. Councillor Race, did you vote
Yes, I did.
in favor?
Yes.
So that is carried unanimously, 6 in favor. So that brings us back to the motion. And we'll just let it get out there. So the motion is that committee seek consensus to direct administration to bring back a report on incentives and options to encourage developers for housing units. Any final discussion on this? Seeing none, we'll call the question. Council, if you can please vote now. Councillor Taylor in favor. And that is carried unanimously. Thank you very much. Council, any further discussion on Councillor Hawes?
So just a clarification, I know we're in the beginning stages of this, but if hypothetically we have a residential tax incentive bylaw, then we have this development incentive bylaw, you can't apply for both. It's one or the other, correct?
Through the chair and members of council. My plan right now is to actually hopefully bring this forward somewhat together and look at incentives generally, and then we decide which ones are the most beneficial. So that might mean that, bylaw may not be the right thing to incentivize, and maybe we want to do something else, or maybe we want to do both, but I think we should look at this as a full package and not one. So my plan would probably be to bring these together.
Awesome. Okay, fair enough. Thank you.
Okay, administration, item 4, oh, sorry, I apologize. Council, any further discussion on that before we move on to 4.6? Mr. Mayor.
Yes, I'd like to take a recommended action that committee direct administration bring forward a bylaw to regulate residential tax incentives to a committee of the whole as discussed.
Council? Any discussion on the recommended action? Sorry, it's not the recommended action. We're indicating a committee of the whole meeting as discussed. so we'll just wait for that to be captured. But if you would like to speak to it, the queue is empty.
Thank you. I don't think it's ready to come back to council.
Council, any further discussion on this? Councilor Taylor?
Well. It's taken us a while to get this far. When would this be ready roughly?
Hinton?
Uh, sorry,
Well, never mind.
through the chair, I don't have a good, clear timeline for you. I would say most likely we're looking at February, March would be my guess.
Councilor Ostacher?
Just a question for administration then, because this motion's specific to tax incentives, but CEO Panasic had indicated that, based on the motion that just passed a couple minutes ago, that you would likely want to bring this forward together. Should the wording be more encompassing than just tax incentives?
Administration?
Through the chair, we can certainly specify that, possibly to a committee of the whole meeting alongside developer incentive options as discussed. If we would like to tie the two together, we can certainly do that.
Mr. Mayor, are you okay with that, or would you like to keep those separate?
I'm not opposed to it directly, but I don't see that it adds anything, and it maybe ties administration's hands if they do need to bring back the other piece for a discussion beforehand, but I go with whatever council decides on that one.
Then, if we can just see the wording for council to consider, because then we can determine whether or not it might be accepted as a friendly amendment. As opposed to an amendment. So CAO, could you rephrase it for Ms. Davy Campbell?
Tax incentives to a committee of the whole meeting alongside developer incentive options as discussed.
Councilor Ostache?
So I think that's a good idea to have them come together. I think looking at the incentives as a package can help council determine, you know, which may be most effective, whether it's incentives, whether it's in tax incentives, or maybe it's a different type of incentive that we feel would initiate development more than just a simple tax incentive. So if Mayor Nisson's okay with it, that friendly amendment's fine. If not, I would be happy to make a formal amendment.
Mayor Nissen?
If no one's opposed, I'm not opposed to the amendment. It can be a friendly amendment.
Council, any opposition to adding that clarification as a friendly amendment? Seeing none, then we'll simply incorporate that, Ms. Davy Campbell, as a friendly amendment.
Jen, it's just committee of the whole meeting as discussed. You can eliminate the first one, yeah. Other way, sorry.
Sorry.
Yeah, just the committee and whole meeting, it just says as discussed.
Council, any further discussion on that? Seeing none, we'll call the question that committee direct administration to bring forward a bylaw to regulate residential tax incentives to a committee of the whole meeting alongside developers incentive options as discussed. Council, if you can please vote now. Councillor Taylor in favor. And Councillor Race, are you in favor or opposed?
Yeah, I voted.
No, but it's not showing online.
Yes, I am.
In favor? Okay, so that is carried unanimously. Thank you very much. Okay. Council, anything else on this before we move on to item 4.6?
I just have to excuse myself.
Okay. Council, we will move on then to item 4.6, Municipal Development Corporation, CAO.
Thank you, Chair. So, the RFD is fairly skinny, but the meat of the report will actually be in the attachment in the, just because it is, there's quite a bit of information and this is a fairly big topic, to digest into, an RFD format, but, you know, at a very high level, the primary intent of a municipally controlled corporation and whatever form that takes would be to function similar to a private developer and position it to better undertake difficult projects or take advantage of creative partnerships or financing mechanisms that may not normally be a part of the town. And, you know, commonly what this will be used for is for things like taking equity stakes in projects or perhaps borrowing for projects without it affecting our own debt limit. And that, you know, just by creating a corporation, it doesn't mean that it won't affect your debt limit. It needs to be structured appropriately to make sure that it doesn't. But, you know, commonly, this would be an arm's length organization that we appoint a board to act on our behalf and to make the decisions on our behalf. You know, my recommendation is if we're going to do this, then all of the land that we spoke about at the infill strategy level, that be transferred over to this corporation for them to manage. You know, and that's really just for those borrowing implications. You can only borrow on a municipal guarantee, or you can borrow on collateral that we provide them, or cash. You know, so you have those options available to you. You know, when it comes to there's quite a few models that we could do, and this is, you know, this is a deep well that we can go down, because there's very different structures that have been provided here. The only, you know, municipal development corporation that takes on a full variety of different developments really is the city of Calgary. But that's a very different scale than what we're talking about here. That's a, you know, more of a profit driven and development corporation that has lots of staff. It has its own, you know, it's much larger than what we would be able to justify here in the town of Hinton. But there's also very small models, like the town of Jasper, who has a municipally controlled corporation and they use it as a vehicle for certain developments. And there's certain benefits, actually, municipalities within national parks all seem to have an MCC structure in some way, shape or form. And there's some benefits when you're working within their environment for having those. So the town of Jasper and their MCC actually utilizes existing staff. They have their own board. You still have all of your annual requirements of running the corporation, but when it comes to actually staffing it, they've used their existing staff as the CEO and directors. So, you know, when it comes to how we would be collaborating with different, you know, private and public entities, I put a little bit in there just so council was aware that, you know, we would be doing a lot of the same things that we were talking about with our infill strategy. We'd be identifying partners through an RFP process. There's still obligations to do these based on, you know, open and transparent processes. There's still an obligation for this entity to comply with municipal trade laws, or all the trade laws that we're subject to, or the NWPTA and the Canadian Free Trade Agreement. So, you know, we don't have this, an arm's length municipal corporation doesn't have all of the rights and all of the flexibility that a private developer would. But it certainly has other options that aren't available to us. You know, when it comes to the public sector, you know, by creating a municipal control corporation, we would more or less be taking on the private role of a P3 partnership. So we could partner with, say, the government of Alberta, and we would be the developer to actually implement the project. So with that said, there is a whole variety of, there's different models that we can select, and within that model, this thing needs to be very carefully constructed to meet our needs and to meet what we're trying to achieve by creating this kind of municipally controlled corporation. So, you know, and this does not happen quickly. 2 years, I think, is a healthy timeline. I think we could probably get it implemented sooner, but, you know, talking to others who have gone through this process, 2 years seem to be somewhat of the norm, to get this up and running. So it doesn't happen quickly just because there are a lot of steps involved. You know, when it comes to developing the mandate, developing the very specific things that we want to accomplish through this municipally controlled corporation, and that's going to affect how it's going to be structured. So, you know, my recommendation for the next steps is that if we're serious about moving forward this, we would secure third-party expertise, and I have some options there. You know, we could apply for some grants to help guide us through this process. We could include this as included in the upcoming budget. We have some options there, but, you know, once we secured that third-party expertise, really it's about developing the mandate, or what is going to be our focus of this corporation. What lands and activity, or, you know, what lands are we going to be providing them, and what activities do we want them to undertake? You know, how do we see financing this corporation? Is it going to be borrowing on its own? Are we transferring collateral? Are we going to be the guarantor? And then further discussion on the structure. Once we have developed the mandate, we would have to go and build a business case for the MCC. And that business plan that's a legislative requirement that we need to have. This MCC will have to prove to, at some point, stand on its own 2 legs without municipal support. That's a requirement. Once we have that business plan, we would have to go through stakeholder engagement, and make the decision to implement that business plan or not. So there's a few steps, takes about 1.5 years to set up this corporation, but with that, I'll take any questions.
Perfect. Thank you. Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, and through the chair to committee, this was a report brought back from a notice of motion that I myself made. And I want to thank administration for the great work. This is a great report. It fulfills all of the intents that I had when I brought this notice of motion forward. For council, to the CAO's comments, there are a lot of questions around whether we wanted to move forward with the Municipal Development Corporation or not. We have a lot of things to answer. I don't believe that we have a vision or a strategy or a project that fits a Municipal Development Corporation today. I wanted to get this information in front of council because I think the opportunity to utilize these structures may present itself in the future. And if it does, I want this to be something that council has been presented with as an option in the past. So it's not a brand new thing when that comes forward. But at this time, I would like to take the recommended action. The committee receives the report about establishing a Municipal Development Corporation for information. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Council, any discussion on the consensus request? Councilor Taylor.
I'm glad you're going that way. You know, from what unless we got like a specific thing that we wanna do with this, you know, the amount of land we have to put into this seems to be. To me, too small to justify this, but something might come up where it's appropriate in the future, so having better understanding of that idea. So I appreciate it, thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Taylor, may I follow up?
Please, Mr. Mayor.
And to your point, that's exactly it. Perhaps in strategic plan, we have crown land discussions or something that utilizes, it's a bigger thing. There's options, but now we've had this report and it's not new. The concept is not new to council and the community. Thank you very much.
Council, any further discussion on that before I call it to question? Seeing none, then we'll call to question that committee receives the report about establishing a municipal development corporation for information. Council, if you could please vote now. Councilor Taylor in favor. And that is carried unanimously. Thank you very much, council. Council, anything additional on that point? Seeing none, we'll move into reporting and we'll start with Councilor Race.
Nothing to report?
Councilor oh, sorry, oh, no, I'm sorry, that's what happens at 7:25. I'm gonna go back to item 5, which is next on the agenda, and that's our information items. Council, anything to bring up or looking for consensus to, accept? Mr. Mayor.
So I will look for the consensus that committee accept the information package for information. But I would like to add, as part of my reporting for council, the letter from Minister McIver is officially approving our internship program, the municipal internship program. And the letter from the Impact Assessment Agency of Canada is regarding the Vista Mine expansion. Council wrote an advocacy letter to this organization a few months ago, and we received a response that they are in fact not going to designate the project, and the status quo continues. So that's good news for our community, and I have had some press interest on that already as well. That is all. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Council, there is a consensus request on the floor. Any discussion? Seeing none, we'll call to question that committee accept the letter, it should just say the information package for information. Give it a sec. Councilor Taylor.
So this letter from Terrence Hubbard, can you explain that? It's hard for me to understand what it actually means. So they were gonna do a full-scale environmental review, and they said we don't have to, basically. Is that what we're talking about?
Yeah, so if we go back a couple months, I think now in council, an issue was presented to us that the minister was requested to designate the Vista Mine project. And we did some advocacy. We sent a letter to this organization that was looking at doing the designation. And the letter we received in our information packages from the organization that would have made that designation. And it is their decision that they are not going to make the designation at this time, and the status quo with the project.
Designate for what, for a review?
An environmental review.
Oh,
So, yeah, the designation has a very specific environmental meaning in this case. I can't give you the specific definition, but they're not doing that, and so the project continues at the status quo. There's no change to this project in our community.
Thank you.
Council, the consensus request is that committee accept the information package for information. Any discussion? Seeing none, we'll call the question. Please vote now. Councilor Taylor in favor. That is carried unanimously. Thank you, council. And with my apologies, now we're on to reporting. I will just double check with my colleague across the table, Councilor Race. Good, Councilor Race?
I'm good, thank you.
Perfect. Councilor Taylor.
Nothing except I went to the town Christmas party and it's always nice to see happy, cheerful people celebrating Christmas. And I think that's a sign, the attendance is a sign of a healthy organization. Numbers seem to be good, and good that people want to come for something like that. All celebrate together.
Thank you, Councilor Taylor. Mr. Mayor?
Thank you, and through the chair to committee. I attended the Evergreens Foundation Strategic Planning and Organizational meeting last week. Helen Keller MP from the municipality of Jasper was elected chair of the organization. It's fitting because, one of our buildings was lost in the Jasper fires and there's a rebuild process going through there and recovery. The majority of the seniors that were displaced by the fires in Jasper have now been, permanently placed in, new locations. There are just a handful that are still awaiting the long-term placements. And that is all I have to update today. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Haas.
Just a couple of things, something I didn't mention, but I attended a bit ago. The Hinton Mobile Community Association wanted to mention the council, you know, over the years, of course, we've heard a lot about the mobile, parks and their concerns there, but they have established a board of directors, an association with the board of directors with the intent, of organizing themselves to basically defend their rights to the landowner. So they're looking at building a retainer when so that they can hire legal representation and get legal consultation done in that area. So I think, you know, this is a good, strong step forward because you know, we've seen this over and over again and very little we can do in the province is not taking any action. So they're stepping up and taking some action on their own. So I thought that was something to also to mention. The other thing is last night, we finished pretty close, the library board, plan of service that we have to submit by June of 2025. So we've gone through the exercise of basically a strategic plan of service for our library. So we pretty much wrapped that up last night, and then we're just waiting upon the draft and then also the tactical plan that the staff will use for objectives on how to accomplish it. So went through that. And I too attended a Christmas party. It was very well attended and a lot of fun. But I also want to mention, thank you to administration and to Trent in particular for organizing the dodgeball tournament. I had the opportunity, the government center team was gracious enough to allow me to participate on their team as a sub-in. It was a lot of fun, and I look forward to the future of dodgeball for our organization. So, you know, because it was a lot of laughs. So thanks to administration. That's all I report.
Thank you, Councillor Haas. Councillor Ostash.
Mr. Chair, I have nothing.
Chair has nothing to report. CAO reporting the status report.
Thank you, Chair. I have included November operating highlights in the package, and you know, I'm sure the question that's pressing on the public's mind is what department is the best at dodgeball, and the answer is government center.
Yes.
I do have a question from Councillor Haas. Councillor Haas.
Yeah, you are. And we got a plaque to also commemorate that as well, presented at the Christmas party. I do have a question. I noticed the notice came out for taxes payment coming up virtually, obviously through our Facebook page. I'm just curious on, because I think typically we also do mail outs with the current strike happening and that not available to us. What is administration's plan to make sure? Because I imagine that, you know, to eliminate as many, you know, penalties as possible and requests for yeah. So any comment on that?
Due to all of the committee, we will be exercising some team building and partnership, driving around and hand delivering supplementary notices. And there's a little bit of mail that has kind of been caught up in since the strike, and we'll also be delivering that as well.
Okay.
Yeah, no one will be working alone. We'll be doing it in pairs, and everybody's going to get an opportunity to participate.
Excellent. Okay, that's a fantastic idea. I appreciate that. Thank you. So, that's all I have. Questions?
Great. Thank you very much, Councillor Haas. Council, we are into section 7 then of our, Councillor Taylor.
I see that we have RFP for golf course operations is closed and we've got negotiations. Is that coming back to the council for discussion? See what the conditions are?
Through the chair, yes, once we have a draft of the, new agreement, we'll bring that forward to council.
Council, if we are prepared, pardon me, we do have a closed. Councilor House.
I will move that we go into closed session.
Thank you very much. Council, any discussion? Seeing none, we'll just wait for it to populate. Council, before I call it to question, or, no, we'll deal with this first. We'll call the question that committee move into closed session at 7:34 PM with a 7-minute break, following. Yeah. Council, if you can please vote now. In favor?
In favor.
In favor, and that is carried unanimously. Council, I made the assumption. That's okay. We did a bio break.